Winning a trophy is hard, but destroying an elite, record-breaking squad takes a truly special type of tactical delusion. This sport has seen managers who inherited champions, golden generations, and squads built to dominate for years. But sometimes it's not just about tactical arrogance or dressing room meltdowns, it's about the one man making decisions so disastrous they unravelled some of football's most successful teams. Today we'll be breaking down how these managers destroyed their great football teams. Before we begin, make sure to like and subscribe, and let's get into it. First, let's talk about David Moyes' disastrous spell at Manchester United in 2013. This wasn't a rebuilding project. Sir Alex Ferguson had just delivered the Premier League title, winning it by 11 points. Moyes inherited champions. Instead of preserving a winning formula, he began changing things almost immediately, creating confusion inside a squad packed with experienced winners. Stories quickly emerged that highlighted the disconnect. He reportedly banned chips at the training ground, frustrating senior players like Rio Ferdinand. Even more bizarrely, Nemanja Vidic was allegedly shown videos of Phil Jagielka as a defensive example, despite being one of the most accomplished defenders in world football. But the real problems appeared on the pitch. The clearest example came against Fulham, when United attempted an astonishing 81 crosses into the box, a Premier League record at the time. Despite the relentless bombardment, the game ended in a draw. It was a performance that perfectly summed up Moyes' reign: predictable, unimaginative, and completely out of ideas. As the season spiralled, Old Trafford lost its fear factor. Teams that once arrived hoping to avoid defeat suddenly believed they could win. The final result was shocking. United crashed from 1st to 7th place, their lowest finish since 1990, and missed Champions League qualification for the first time in 18 years. In just 10 months, Moyes had turned champions into a shadow of themselves, dismantling the aura that Ferguson had spent decades building. Next, we have Rafael Benitez at Inter Milan, one of the most uncomfortable title defences in modern football. Jose Mourinho had just delivered something legendary: Inter's first ever continental treble. They were kings of Europe, Serie A champions, and one of the most feared teams on the planet. The squad was experienced, disciplined, and perfectly built for Mourinho's system. Then Benitez arrived. Almost immediately tension started brewing. Reports emerged that Mourinho's photos were removed from parts of the training ground, while Marco Materazzi later claimed Benitez was afraid of his own shadow and obsessed with escaping Mourinho's legacy. The problems quickly spread onto the pitch. Benitez tried to change the team's style, pushing ideas that didn't fit an aging squad. Defenders like Lucio and Materazzi suddenly looked exposed, while the defensive solidity that had defined Inter's treble season began to disappear. Results collapsed. By December, Inter had fallen well behind in the Serie A title race, turning a championship defence into a crisis before Christmas. Ironically, Benitez still won the FIFA Club World Cup, but instead of enjoying the moment, he stunned everyone with a public ultimatum: back me with signings or replace me. Inter's board didn't hesitate. 5 days after lifting a world trophy, Benitez was sacked. In barely 6 months, a team that had conquered Europe went from a historic treble winner to a fractured dressing room, searching for its identity again. Then there's Claudio Ranieri, a manager who somehow achieved both the greatest miracle and one of the fastest collapses in Premier League history. In 2016, Ranieri led Leicester City to the impossible. A team given 5,000 to 1 odds won the Premier League, shocking the football world and completing one of the greatest underdog stories ever seen. But the season that followed felt like a completely different reality. The magic vanished almost overnight. Ranieri began constantly changing formations and searching for answers that never came. The stability and belief that powered Leicester's title run were replaced by confusion. Players looked lost, performances became lifeless, and defeats started piling up. By February 2017, the reigning champions were in serious danger. Leicester sat just 1 point above the relegation zone, an almost unthinkable position for a team that had lifted the trophy only 9 months earlier. The numbers were brutal. Leicester became the first defending English champion since 1956 to lose 5 consecutive league matches, and they failed to score a single goal during that run. Behind the scenes, reports claimed senior players met with the club's owner to discuss growing concerns as the season spiralled out of control. The final blow came after a Champions League defeat to Sevilla. Days later, Ranieri was gone. It remains one of football's strangest stories. The man who achieved the impossible by winning Leicester the league nearly pulled off another miracle the very next season, dragging the champions into a relegation battle. Then there's Carlos Queiroz, the man who inherited one of the most talented squads football has ever seen, and somehow watched it collapse in spectacular fashion. This was the original Real Madrid Galacticos era. Zinedine Zidane, Ronaldo, Luis Figo, David Beckham, Roberto Carlos. On paper, they looked unbeatable. By March 2004, Madrid were leading La Liga by 8 points, and were still fighting on multiple fronts. Everything pointed toward a dominant season. But underneath the glamour, cracks were already forming. The biggest blow came with the departure of Claude Makelele, the midfielder who balanced the entire team. Years later, Zidane famously questioned the decision, comparing it to adding gold paint to a Bentley while removing the engine. Without him, Madrid lost the player who held everything together. As the season dragged on, Queiroz struggled to rotate his stars. Fatigue kicked in, performances dipped, and the team suddenly looked vulnerable. Then came the collapse. Real Madrid were knocked out of the Champions League by Monaco, with their own loaned-out striker Fernando Morientes scoring against them in one of football's most painful twists. What followed in La Liga was even worse. Madrid lost their final 5 league matches in a row, a historic collapse that handed the title to Valencia and sent the Galacticos crashing down to 4th place. A team filled with superstars finished the season trophyless. Queiroz didn't just lose a title race, he oversaw one of the most infamous collapses in Real Madrid history. Then there's Louis van Gaal at Bayern Munich, a manager brilliant enough to build a powerhouse, but stubborn enough to nearly tear it apart just a year later. When Van Gaal arrived in 2009, he immediately made it clear that nobody was bigger than his system. Not club legends, not star players, nobody. His relationship with Luca Toni quickly exploded, and the Italian striker later revealed that Van Gaal once pulled down his trousers in front of the squad to prove he had the courage to drop any player he wanted. It perfectly summed up his confrontational style. At first, the results justified the chaos. Bayern won the Bundesliga and DFB Pokal double, and even reached the Champions League final in his first season. But beneath the success, tensions were growing. Key figures clashed with Van Gaal's rigid philosophy, while defenders like Lucio were pushed out despite their importance to the squad. Bayern's dressing room increasingly felt divided between players who fit the system and those who didn't. Then came the second season. Van Gaal refused to make major adjustments despite injuries, defensive problems, and worsening results. Bayern's high line became increasingly vulnerable, and performances turned wildly inconsistent. By the spring of 2011, the German giants had fallen out of the title race and were suddenly in danger of missing Champions League qualification altogether. The pressure inside the club became unbearable. The board finally stepped in. In April 2011, with Bayern slipping down the table and confidence collapsing, Van Gaal was sacked before the season even ended. Van Gaal's obsession with control turned one of Europe's strongest squads into a fractured team constantly fighting itself. Next, we have Raymond Domenech, the man who took a World Cup finalist and turned them into football's biggest circus. Domenech's reign was surrounded by controversy, including long-standing claims that he considered astrology when evaluating players. His unusual methods often baffled both fans and the French media. But the real disaster arrived at the 2010 World Cup, after Nicolas Anelka was sent home following a heated confrontation with Domenech. The French squad erupted. Players refused to train, staging a public mutiny that stunned the football world. In one of the tournament's most surreal moments, Domenech stood helplessly reading the players' protest statement to reporters outside the team bus. France finished bottom of their group, with just 1 point and 1 goal. A squad packed with elite talent became an international embarrassment, creating one of the most chaotic and toxic collapses football has ever witnessed. Then there's Maurizio Sarri, a manager who won the league, yet still left Juventus feeling weaker than before. When Sarri arrived in 2019, Juventus had already won 8 consecutive Serie A titles. This was a squad built on discipline, experience, and ruthless efficiency. But Sarri wanted something different. He tried to impose his possession-heavy Sarri ball philosophy on a veteran team that had spent years winning through pragmatism and control. Reports suggested several senior players struggled to fully embrace his methods, while Sarri himself publicly complained that the squad was difficult to coach. Juventus still won Serie A, but the dominance was fading. They looked vulnerable, inconsistent, and far less intimidating than previous title-winning sides. The final blow came in the Champions League, where they were eliminated by Lyon in the round of 16. Days later, Sarri was sacked. He delivered a trophy, but many saw his reign as the moment Juventus's long era of unquestioned dominance finally began to unravel. Finally, there's Roberto Di Matteo, the man who delivered Chelsea's greatest night and then oversaw one of the quickest declines by a reigning European champion. In May 2012, Di Matteo guided Chelsea to an unlikely Champions League triumph, defeating Bayern Munich in their own stadium. It was one of football's greatest underdog stories. But once handed the job permanently, the challenge changed completely. Winning a cup run was one thing, building a long-term elite team was another. Chelsea invested heavily in attacking talent, including Eden Hazard, but the balance that had defined their Champions League success quickly disappeared. Results became inconsistent, and performances lacked structure. The breaking point came in November 2012, when Chelsea were comfortably beaten 3-0 by Juventus in Turin, a defeat that exposed major tactical flaws. Weeks later, Chelsea became the first reigning Champions League holders ever eliminated in the group stage. Roman Abramovich acted swiftly, sacking Di Matteo just 6 months after he conquered Europe. The man who reached the summit of European football had gone from champion to unemployed in record time. It is absolutely wild how fast a world-class dynasty can completely turn into an amateur Sunday League comedy show. So which of these historic team-killing jobs do you think was the absolute worst crime against football? Which manager did the most damage to a great team? Did we miss anyone who deserves a place on this list? Let us know in the comments below. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and we'll see you in the next one.